Most of the time, we just want a story that knows where it's going. We don't need a massive map or hundreds of hours of filler. We want a focused, single-player adventure with a clear beginning, middle, and end. We're looking back at some of the best linear experiences from the modern era. We're keeping the scope to more recent years to keep things moving, but these are the titles that prove a direct path is often the most memorable one. Here are the essential linear games you shouldn't miss.
Random act of violence. This was a ritual.
This is a survival horror sequel that really leans into the weird meta storytelling that the folks at Remedy are known for. You split time between Alan, who is still trapped in a nightmare dimension, and a new FBI profiler named Saga Anderson. It's a slow burn mystery that feels atmospheric, especially when you're trekking through the rainy, dense woods of the Pacific Northwest. The game shifts between a grounded detective story and a full-blown psychological horror show. One of the notable moments has to be the musical sequence. It's the kind of creative risk that most big studios just wouldn't take, but it works perfectly here. The combat is much more deliberate than the first game, focusing on resource management and making every shot count against these shadowy Taken figures. You use your flashlight to burn away shields, but the inventory space is limited and the enemies hit hard. Then there's the mind place mechanic, where you actually go into a mental room to piece together clues on a caseboard. It's a cool way to keep you engaged with the plot without just sitting through a cutscene. The lighting and the sheer level of detail in the environments make it a clear step forward for the studio.
Resistance alert!
They don't make a lot of action, platform, or mascot games anymore, but thankfully this one exists, and it's a banger. While it features some planet hopping and a bit of freedom like the previous entries in the series, it's a solid adventure from beginning to end. A new Lombax named Rivet is introduced, who actually feels like a natural part of the mix rather than a shoehorned character. If you care about the lore and these characters, there is a lot of heart here. The fast gameplay is a real highlight. You zip between dimensions instantly, using a ridiculous arsenal of gadgets and guns that make every fight feel like pure chaos. The technical side is where things get really interesting, with the way the world can shift entirely just by hitting a crystal or jumping through a rift. How the hardware handled these transitions without any loading screens was just insane. It kept the pacing direct. The combat is familiar, but the addition of the Phantom Dash adds a layer of mobility that makes the shootouts feel much sharper. It's a level-paced experience that does a lot of cool things with its scale and visual trickery. It fits perfectly into the universe while pushing the variety of the encounters to a new level.
Do you know what a birthright is, Peter?
While a lot of superhero games go for the open-world approach, Guardians of the Galaxy keeps it simple. It's a level-based adventure where you play as Star-Lord, and while you're the one holding the blasters, you have constant control over the other Guardians. It's steeped in Marvel comic book lore, not just the movies, but the real silly space galactic stuff. This is a story with a lot of heart, and even though it has similarities to the films, it dives way deeper into these characters in some really heartfelt ways. It gets emotional, but it's also cool as hell with some solid boss battles and an ending worth sticking around for. The banter between the team is a character of its own, with the crew constantly bickering or bonding as you navigate different planets. There's the huddle mechanic, which lets you pull the team together for a mid-battle pep talk to trigger a stat boost and a licensed 80s track. The combat can get a bit repetitive, especially since Peter's basic shots don't always feel super powerful, but the strategy comes from chaining the team's abilities together. It's an experience where the writing and the chemistry between the cast really elevate the whole story. The Order 1886 was the poster child for the quality over quantity debate. It's an alternate history London where you're part of an elite order of knights using high-tech gadgets and thermite rifles to hunt down half-breeds. The first thing that catches you is the presentation. It uses a cinematic letterbox format and a visual style that makes the transition between cutscenes and gameplay almost invisible. It's a very straightforward, level-based adventure that doesn't mess around with side quests or open areas. You move from one set piece to the next, from intense cover-based shootouts to these quick-time event brawls that feel substantial and grounded. The Tesla-inspired weaponry, like the arc gun that chains lightning between enemies, is a highlight, though these tools don't show up as often as some might like. While the combat is standard third-person shooting, the world building is where it stands out. The mix of Victorian aesthetics and advanced steampunk technology creates an atmosphere that's hard to find anywhere else. It's a focused experience considering the length of this game, but it puts all its chips on narrative and immersion, even if it leaves you wanting more of that lore once the credits hit. A lot of people think of this as just another open-world game, but it's actually a very tight, narrative-driven experience. This is a ground-up remake of the 2002 original that trades the usual open-world checklist for a cinematic story about Tommy Angelo's rise through the Salieri crime family. It's set in a beautiful recreation of 1930s Lost Heaven, and while you can drive around and take in the sights, the game is really focused on moving you from one high-stakes chapter to the next. The presentation is incredible, with a lot of attention paid to the period-accurate cars and the moody, noir atmosphere that makes you feel like you're playing through a classic mob film. The gameplay is a massive update over the original, using the engine from Mafia 3, but stripping away all the repetitive nonsense. You do everything from high-speed chases in clunky vintage cars to intense shootouts in art galleries and barns. If you want a real challenge, you can play on classic difficulty, which brings back the simulation driving and the strict police response, where they'll actually pull you over for speeding. It's a relatively short journey compared to most modern games, but it's all about the pacing and the performances. The way it fleshes out the supporting cast and the relationship between Tommy and Sarah gives the whole thing much more emotional weight than it had back in the day.
For those who prove worthy.
The last adventure of Nathan Drake is a compelling one. It's definitely different from the bombastic nature of the earlier sequels, but it still has a bunch of cool action set pieces. It's all centered around a story with a lot of heart and human characters. Now, this is a linear game, but it's the first time the series opened up a little bit, with you able to explore your surroundings more. But still, this is a straightforward and well-paced adventure. It takes you to a lot of different places and spans a bunch of different time periods. And even though it's a linear single-player game, it's actually a pretty lengthy one. This one will take you some time to really chew through. Not to mention the fact that it looks incredible. The transition to a more grounded narrative was a bit of a shift, but the focus on the relationship between Nathan and his brother Sam provides a solid motivation for the globe-trotting treasure hunt. The action hits with impact, yet it feels more integrated into the personal stakes of the cast. Even with the expanded scope of the maps, the design avoids the bloat of a massive world, keeping the momentum focused on the end. One of the most rewarding adventures on this list is Sifu. It's a dedicated Pak Mei Kung Fu brawler that really captures that feeling of being a martial arts master, but only if you're willing to put in the work. It's a revenge story where you're hunting down the 5 people who killed your father, and it uses a really unique death mechanic. Basically, you have a magical talisman that brings you back to life when you fall, but every time you use it, you age. You start at 20, and if you aren't careful, you'll be in your 70s before you even get halfway through the game. The combat is all about flow and using your surroundings. You don't just mash buttons. You parry, dodge, and use everything from bottles to broomsticks to control the room. There was a lot of buzz about the structure system, which works a bit like Sekiro, where you're trying to break an enemy's guard to get a finisher. It's the kind of game that encourages you to go back and replay earlier levels, just so you can reach the next one at a younger age. While it launched as an incredibly difficult experience, the developers eventually added different difficulty settings so more people could see the game through. It's a stylish, punchy, and atmospheric trek that feels like playing through a modern martial arts film.
Music player in my chest.
This game hit multi-platform and everybody should check it out. If you like cartoons, anime, and action hack-and-slash games like Bayonetta or Devil May Cry, and music, of course, then this is the game for you. It's a hybrid between a slashy combat and a rhythm-based beat-em-up, so the game encourages you to whack and hit and combo enemies on a beat for damage bonuses. And this really translates to everything else in the world. Everything is bouncing, everything is moving, and the boss battles, when tuned to the beat, are some of the coolest boss battle sequences we've experienced in a long time. This is a level-based, simple game. You play through each level. That's it. It's cut and dry, just like how they used to make them. But it feels absolutely new and fresh from its visual style to its rhythm-based gameplay. Hi-Fi Rush is another banger. This one is just a throwback to early 2000s games in the best way possible. This cowboy horror shoot-them-up is schlocky and perfect, casting you as Jesse Rentier, a high-tech vampire hunter in a weird West setting that's crawling with bloodsuckers. It's a series of focused, punchy missions where you're constantly pushed into arena-style brawls. The core of the experience is that lightning-fueled gauntlet, which lets you zip toward enemies or pull them into a mid-air juggle while you blast them with a sawed-off shotgun. It borrows that heavy, over-the-shoulder feel from modern action titles, but ditches the fluff for a loop that's all about finding creative ways to turn monsters into a mushy puddle of goo. The way it handles your arsenal is smart, using cooldown timers instead of traditional ammo management, so you're always encouraged to swap between your rifle, flamethrower, and electrified punches without stopping to scavenge. There's a real flow state you hit once you start mixing the Zapper's crowd control with those gory finisher moves. The level layouts can be a bit predictable, walking from one fight to a dialogue break and then back to another fight, but the variety in the environments, from snowy mountains to arid deserts, keeps it visually interesting. It's the kind of game you boot up when you just want to feel powerful, leveraging a ridiculous selection of weaponry to deliver a symphony of violence. Sekiro: Shadows Die Twice was a bit of a departure for the folks at From Software, trading the RPG character creators and stat-heavy builds of the Souls games for a very specific character-driven journey. You play as Wolf, a shinobi on a mission to rescue his young lord, and it feels much more like a direct action adventure. The movement is a huge highlight here, since you have a grappling hook and actual verticality, allowing you to zip across rooftops and use stealth to thin out the herd before you commit to a fight. The combat is a high-stakes rhythm game, where you are dodging, blocking, and deflecting. You trade blows to build up your opponent's posture bar, and once that breaks, you get that incredibly satisfying shinobi death blow that ends the encounter. It has a steeper learning curve than almost anything else out there, and there's no way to just over-level your way through a boss. You have to actually master the timings. There was a lot of talk about how intense the clashing of swords feels, and once that mechanic finally clicks, it's one of the most rewarding loops in gaming. It's a brutal and atmospheric trek through a war-torn version of Sengoku-era Japan.
What have you got, Isaac?
This remake shows how you handle a classic. It's a ground-up recreation of Isaac Clarke's nightmare on the USG Ishimura, but it does a lot more than just slap on a coat of paint. One of the biggest shifts is that Isaac actually has a voice now. Gunnar Wright came back to play the role, which gives the character way more agency. Instead of just being a silent guy following orders, he's actively engaging with the crew and trying to solve the mystery of what happened to his girlfriend, Nicole. The whole ship is now one continuous environment, so you can actually take the tram between different sectors without a single loading screen, which makes the Ishimura feel like a real interconnected place rather than just a series of levels. The gameplay is still centered around that iconic strategic dismemberment, but they added a peeling system that's pretty disturbing. You can see the skin and muscle strip away from the bone as you blast these things, so you have a better idea of how much health they have left. They also borrowed the 360-degree zero-G movement from the sequels, so floating through the hangar or the engine room feels much more natural. There's even an intensity director working behind the scenes that throws random events at you, like flickering lights or distant screens, just to make sure you never feel too safe. It's a lengthy, atmospheric experience that manages to be even more intense than the original, while adding enough new lore and side quests to make it feel current. The Resident Evil 2 remake stands tall for good reason. It really set a new standard for how you bring back a classic without losing that original tension. You are dropped into a raccoon city that feels way more intense than it did back in the day, mostly thanks to that darkness and wetness design that developers were obsessed with. The police station itself is peak level design, built like a giant gothic puzzle box that you slowly peel apart. You're constantly making these split-second calls on whether to use your last few bullets on a zombie or just risk a mad dash past it. The gore system is on another level. Shooting limbs off or seeing the real-time damage as zombies chew through doors makes every encounter feel intense. Mr. X brings the pressure. Having an unkillable stalker following your footsteps while you're trying to solve a clock tower puzzle adds this layer of persistent stress that never really lets up. It's that constant thud, thud, thud of boots somewhere above you. Between the redesigned boss fights and the way it forces you to build a mental map of every safe room, it's a clear example of how to do survival horror right. Silent Hill 2 Remake really hits that psychological sweet spot. It's a ground-up reimagining of James Sunderland's journey into a fog-shrouded town. And while it stays remarkably faithful to the heavy, David Lynchian vibe, there's a lot that feels updated. The perspective has shifted to an over-the-shoulder view, which makes the cramped hallways of the apartments and the hospital feel way more claustrophobic. You're still dealing with that iconic radio static that crackles when enemies are near, but now the combat is more involved, with a dedicated dodge and manual aiming that gives those encounters some needed substance. It's a long trek through some of the environments out there, from the decaying streets to the near-total darkness of the prison. The puzzles are a big part of the experience here, and many have been redesigned or completely remixed to keep things interesting. The boss fights were actually improved, turning what used to be fairly simple encounters into multi-phase battles that actually require some strategy. And the combat can get a bit frequent in the later sections, especially with mannequins jumping out from every corner. But it all serves to mirror that downward spiral into James's psyche. The attention to detail in the sound design, the dripping water, the distant metallic scraping, really keeps the tension high. It captures that feeling of a classic survival horror adventure while bringing the presentation into a new light. This is a really interesting and incredibly underrated first-person survival horror game that handles some heavy concepts, how it handles man versus machine and that isolated underwater setting. It can be really creepy and unsettling, with weird, bizarre, robotic aquatic creatures hunting you down. But it is really the concepts behind the game that stick. You know, the loneliness of an underwater facility in pitch-black darkness, and machines possibly exhibiting human consciousness. There was a lot to it, especially the more you look into it. And it comes from the people who knew what they were doing at Frictional Games, the team behind Amnesia. The way the story unfolds through terminal entries and environmental clues gives that feeling that this world was once alive but is now crumbling. Jump scares are present, but the slow realization of what happened to the crew really gets to you. Some of the encounters with the corrupted machines can be a bit of a cat-and-mouse game, and while the stealth mechanics are simple, they serve the tension perfectly. It's the kind of experience where the questions it asks about what it even means to be alive are just as frightening as the monsters in the halls. It's still worth checking out if you never have.
Holy shit, Joel.
Surprise.
Not everyone loves this game. It has a lot of divisive story choices that have been debated endlessly, but it remains a big, linear, single-player adventure. Granted, there are parts where you can explore the environment, a bit like what was done in earlier Naughty Dog titles. But this is still a compelling and long journey that you see through to an end. This is probably one of the longer linear adventures out there, and it feels like a massive trek. It takes you to a lot of places, from beautiful locations to scary horror segments involving creepy cults and some really intense shootouts. If you're going in blind, enjoy. The gameplay loop works well, taking the stealth and resource management from the first game and improving everything. You're constantly scavenging for scraps to upgrade your gear while dealing with enemy AI that feels much more coordinated. There was a lot said about how the combat felt more direct, with animations that make every encounter feel substantial. It manages to balance these action moments with quiet, atmospheric beats that really build out the world. Whether the plot works for you or not, the level of detail put into the ruined urban areas is something else.
7274. Your data recorder.
One of the undisputed champs of the genre is Titanfall 2. It has one of the most underrated single-player campaigns ever, especially since it arrived at a time when most first-person shooters were going fully multiplayer or just slapping together a story mode without much effort. This isn't that. It builds out a massive world while establishing a real connection between the human pilot, Jack Cooper, and the Titan machine, BT-7274. Besides just having some really spectacular shootouts and some cool environments, it still manages to have some big, memorable moments and action set pieces that still get brought up today. The whole time travel sequence is really unique, and the game is just constantly introducing new things to you every hour as you play through. It's not the longest campaign in the world, but it is 100% the poster child for quality over quantity. The way it weaves wall running and double jumping into the level design makes the movement feel like a puzzle you're solving at high speed. The buzz about the effect and cause level completely flipped the script on what people expected from a military shooter. It's a briskly paced title that never lets up until the end.
That covers some of the best experiences you can have when a developer just points you in a direction and lets the story unfold. But I want to hear from you. Did your favorite linear adventure make the cut? Or did I miss a massive one that everyone needs to play? Drop a comment below and let's talk about it. If you enjoyed the video, give it a like and consider subscribing for more. We really appreciate you watching. Take care.